All set, Sasha?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to the MAPC Executive Committee meeting for January 27th, 2021. My name is Erin Wortman. I am MAPC's president. As I call the meeting to order, I want to thank you all for joining the Executive Committee meeting. The Executive Committee is being conducted remotely via Zoom video conference consistent with Governor Baker's Executive Order of March 12, 2020. To provide public access to the meeting while limiting the potential for abuse of video conferencing technology, aka Zoom bombs, we are live streaming and recording today's session to our YouTube channel. Since this is an open meeting, people from the public can participate in this way, and a saved copy is always accessible via our MAPC YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/user/MAPC Metro Boston. Okay, now that we kind of got all that housekeeping out of the way, I also want to give a quick thank you to my fellow officers, Adam, VP Adam, Secretary Sandra, and Treasurer Sam, as well as Mark, Rebecca, Heidi, for kind of filling in my absence over the last few weeks. I really appreciate, filling in and helping me out as I work through things kind of over here. But I'm back, and hopefully for a long time, not just a good time. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to call attendance. So if everyone could get off mute. Oh, thanks, Mark. So if everyone could get off mute for a second, I'm going to kind of do the very quick attendance. And again, if I butcher your name, let's just say I'm out of practice and if there's no ill intent. Okay, here we go. Sharonda Almeida.
Present.
John Barrows. Past President Keith Bergman.
Present.
Karen Canfield.
Present.
Adam Chapdelaine.
Present.
Bob Cohen.
Yes.
Mayor Curtatone. Tom Daniel.
Yes.
John DePriest.
Present.
Yolanda Greaves.
Present.
Sandra Hackman.
Yes.
Mo Handel.
Present.
Jared Johnson. Tabor Keeley.
Here.
Steve Olenoff.
Present.
Caitlin Pasafaro. George Proakis.
Here.
Courtney Rainey.
Present.
Jenny Raitt.
Present.
Vandana Rao.
Present.
Sam Seidel.
Here.
Steve Silvera.
Here.
Ooh, Lauren, I haven't practiced your last name yet. Lauren S. from BPDA.
Yes, Lauren Shirtleff, I'm here.
Shirtleff, all right, I got it. Thank you, Lauren. Mayor Spicer. Juan Vega. Elaine Vanya. And Erin Wortman, here, present. Great, thank you all. And if I missed you, just put in the chat. If you're a voting member and I missed you, please put in the chat so I can rectify that. Great. So next up on our agenda is the approval of minutes from December 16th, 2020. I'm looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion made by Yolanda, second made by Bob Cohen. If there is any questions, comments? Great, seeing none. Because it is a virtual meeting, we have to do roll call for every vote. So let's unmute. I'm only going to do first names, if that's okay with everyone. So here we go. Sharonda?
Aye.
John? Keith?
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can we hold the vote? I'm sorry. Courtney? I'm sorry.
Yes. Hi, very sorry. I was looking over the minutes and was just taking a look when we voted last month on the legislative priorities. I don't know. I don't think my vote was recorded correctly. So before I approve the minutes, I know that I voted to abstain and I was marked as an aye vote. I just wanted to flag that because others might be in the same boat as I was.
Okay, great. Thank you, Courtney. We get it's the agency vote, totally. Was everyone else's, I'm looking at you, kind of ex officio group, everyone else is good with that vote? How it was captured, I mean? Great.
Heidi, I do not have the vote if I could, Aaron, I do not have the document in front of me. Who is recorded as having abstained?
Nobody.
So
I'll
I feel like, well, we can't just change them, but I think we should check probably with the agency reps. I'm just aware of the fact that they are not all on the call today.
Mhm.
So maybe when we adopt the minutes, I know we were in the middle of a vote, Aaron, maybe we should take the vote again. I think the motion should be to adopt the minutes pending a check with agency representatives on that particular legislative priority vote.
Okay.
Or it could be deferred to next month and we could save ourselves 5 minutes.
I move we defer the minutes till
Yeah,
next month.
I would second that to move it.
Okay. So if Yolanda and Bob, since we do have a motion before us, are you okay with withdrawing your motion?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem.
So thank you. So Mo and was it Karen that did that second about deferring the minutes till next month?
No, it was me,
Sorry.
Yolanda.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yep.
You're all in the same row here. Great. So Mo made the motion to defer the minutes or move the minutes to next month, and Yolanda seconded. Well, guess what? We still have to do a roll call. So
Aaron, if I may, I would suggest, Aaron, that if the previous motion was withdrawn,
Yes.
Mhm.
there is no motion on the table.
No
Okay.
vote
It is
needed.
unnecessary to do anything at all.
Yeah.
If we could simply ask Mo and Yolanda to withdraw their motion.
I withdraw my second.
I withdraw my motion.
thank you. Well, aren't we having a little mini class on Robert's rules first thing this morning? All right, great. Well, not first thing, but you know what I mean. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Mo and Yolanda, for withdrawing your items. So thank you. So we'll just deal with that at next month's meeting. Great. Next up on the agenda is the report of the treasurer, Sam.
Thank
Take it
you,
away.
Aaron. Aaron, nice to see you again. Greetings to everybody. This is the treasurer's report looking at the income statement from November 2020. So we're about a month and a half ago looking at those numbers. And overall, the numbers are good. I would just point out that our revenue was down under our budget by a little more than expected. We came in at 73% of what we budgeted, but our direct labor was also lower, as was our administrative expenses. And as we all know, the numbers we care most about for these reports are direct labor and the administrative expenses, because those give us our overhead rate. And our overhead rate for the month of November was 121%, which is below our approved overhead rate of 123%. And that's a good thing. We want to be below that number. And if you look over on the right-hand column, which give us our fiscal year to date, you see that we're at 122% for our overhead rate, which again is below the approved 123%. And that's a good thing. The only thing I would note in conversations with Sheila is that our interest income is very low. And the reason for this is that interest rates have dropped significantly, whereas that used to produce a little bit of cash that we would fold back in. These days, the interest rates have just dropped through the floor. So there's very little money coming through that. Beyond that, not much to report. November was a holiday month, so people took time off, Veterans Day, Thanksgiving time. which explains some of the lower numbers. And with that, I'd entertain any questions or a motion to accept the treasurer's report.
Sam?
Yep, it looks
yes.
like Bob has a
Robert.
question.
A question,
Yes.
Sam. So I would assume most people are working remotely from the office. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding, is that everybody pretty much is at home. Mark and Rebecca can fill us in as if anybody is going into the office. I
No,
don't.
everyone's
actually
at
know
home. There are occasional people who will go in for short stints, but Heidi picks up the mail. We have one staff person who has 3 small children who occasionally goes in and works from his desk, but essentially the office is closed. People are not working from the office.
The reason I asked that question, so now that we're almost a year into this, I would assume our utility costs must have been substantially down if we're not using any utilities.
That's a very good question, and I'd have to defer that specifically. I know that there were some bump up costs in terms of getting everybody onto remote and getting all the licenses for Adobe and Zoom and et cetera. Those have been folded in and pretty much dealt with, but I don't actually know the answer on the utility
let me answer
costs.
that. So the way that this works is actually is paid by our landlord, and there's a rider that we negotiate every year. So we will be negotiating that for next year. And obviously there's a tremendous amount of savings that the landlord has experienced, both I think cleaning cost, utility cost, and security costs. So we'll be working on that. But there have been a lot of other expenses, in terms of
Right.
what we need to operate remotely that have really kept our expenses higher. I would also add that there have been really increased pressures on our FMLA and COVID leave. So, folks that either have to quarantine or, particularly in the spring or summer didn't have access to childcare or schools. And so that is also a major pressure on our cost side or our overhead side.
Right. I understand. One more question, Sam, about this. So not that I'm advocating this, but a lot of my clients who have commercial property or leases in commercial property, since most of their workforce is working from home these days, are trying to negotiate better terms with their landlord. Are we engaged in such a thing?
That's a Mark or Rebecca question for sure.
We are actually very lucky. We actually negotiated our lease during the last recession and did a long-term lease. So we actually have incredibly favorable terms, at least, compared to where the market was before this. Right now, our focus on negotiation is really negotiating around the landlord actually doing the studies and making sure that we have the right air quality and filtration so that when we do come back to the office, folks feel comfortable. Additionally, we had been planning on a major expense of having to redo the 6th floor to accommodate more space. If you'll remember, we were running out of space for staff. I think now that we're anticipating that we'll at least have some folks that continue to work from home on some days moving forward, that's an expense that we're not going to have to incur. We're looking at and thinking about rotating desks or workspaces for when we do come back.
All right. Thank you.
Great questions. Anyone else? Okay, great. Sam, if it's okay, I'm just going to ask for a motion. Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Great. So I'm looking at this time for a motion to accept.
Move to approve.
Great.
Second.
Okay. Motion made by Bob Cohen, second made by John DePriest. Any other questions or comments? Awesome. All right. Here we go with the vote. Sharonda?
Aye.
John? Keith?
Aye.
Karen?
Aye.
Adam?
Aye.
Bob Cohen?
Yes.
Mayor Curtatone? Tom Daniel?
Aye.
John DePriest?
Aye.
Yolanda?
Aye.
Sandra?
Yes.
Mo?
Aye.
Jared's absent. Tabor?
Aye.
Steve Olenoff?
Aye.
Caitlin absent. George?
Aye.
Courtney?
Aye.
Jenny?
Aye.
Vandana?
Aye.
Sam?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Lauren?
Aye.
Mayor Spicer, I think, is absent. Juan is absent. Elaine is absent. And Aaron? Aye. Motion passes. Thank you all so much for that. Next up on the agenda is the report of the Executive Director, Mark.
Morning, everyone. I'm just going to focus on a few things. And I'm sorry if I'm a little more focused on legislative matters and on COVID response than I normally would be. There is no written executive director's report this month. As you'll recall, we had a 3-month report last time. I expect we'll have a 2-month report for February, covering the first 2, basically mid-December through mid-February. So you can look forward to that at the time. We have been through an exceptionally busy legislative time. I know we will get into that when Keith and Lizzie provide the report of the legislative committee. But I do want to note that we went through a very heavy end of session with a tremendous amount of work. Things did not come out of the legislature until quite late, but a lot came out. Pretty much all the big bills that we were looking for: police reform, the budget, the economic development bond bill, the transportation bond bill, and the climate bill being the most pronounced. Staff did a tremendous amount of work, and many of you did a tremendous amount of work to bring those through with the vast majority of our objectives met. And certainly not all, but when they came through, the vast majority of issues that MAPC was really pushing for were incorporated in those bills, either in whole or in part, and in most cases in whole. We certainly saw that in the budget. In many ways, it inured to the benefit of our programs, but also the benefit of MAPC from a financial perspective, with DLTA and Shannon being funded as generously as they were. We saw many of our objectives accomplished in the police reform bill, although we will have more that we are pushing for this year, particularly as relates to municipal authority in regard to police discipline or police hiring processes. In the economic development bond bill, we have additional planning funds. We have additional funds for a number of small business line items. And of course, we also got housing choices passed with several additional items in that. A couple of additional items in that, actually. One new one that I just found out about recently, which I wasn't quite sure about. In transportation, we did not get regional ballot initiatives, but we got many of the things we were looking for in that bill, considering the fact that it wasn't a full revenue bill. And then, of course, in climate, we got an excellent bill on climate. I do not want to hide the fact that we are disappointed by many of the governor's vetoes in regard to this legislation, both the climate bill as a whole and individual elements of the other bills. And we'll be working on that in the next session. The reason I mention all of this, and I know you'll get more detail later, is that I think our government affairs staff deserves special credit, really a tremendous amount of credit for their work during this extremely difficult and challenging session. I want to note that this is something that people don't often know, but many other staff in climate, in housing, in economic development, in digital, in just so many different areas, work on these items individually with government affairs, because we need that technical expertise. I think of the work that people did, like Allison Felix, on the TNC stuff and on automated vehicles. I think of the work that the arts and culture folks and the food folks have done on individual pieces of legislation that relate to their work. I think of the work of our clean energy department in regard to the climate bill. There's just a tremendous amount of heart and energy that goes into this. And this time, we had to sustain it until like 4 o'clock in the morning, not on first on July 31st, and then again on whatever it was, July 3rd. I'm not quite sure. And I just want to thank everybody for that. Policy is a big part of this agency's priorities. That is not true for all regional planning agencies around the country, but it is for us. And although people were disappointed, I was disappointed with a lot of things. There were a tremendous number of wins this year. Wins for us, wins for the legislature, wins for the administration, and wins for the Commonwealth. It's not a time of great happiness. I know that, but I think it's important to take a moment and just mention that and recognize the victories. And we'll build on that in the next session. And we'll build on that with all the policy work that we do with the administration. And now, in the coming year, the policy work that we're going to be doing with the federal government, which I have a suspicion will be a little more robust than and impactful than what we've had during the past 4 years. I also want to note that the agency continues to work with our communities on COVID relief or COVID response, relief, and recovery. We are now spending more time on vaccine rollout than we obviously have in the past. The subject of an important meeting with mayors and managers this morning, and will be the subject of an additional meeting with Lieutenant Governor on Friday. We are working with all of our communities to not only make sure that they have more clear guidance about how individuals and on what schedule individuals can receive the vaccine, but also that we are particularly focused on working with our localities on reaching hard to reach populations in the most heavily impacted communities. That is a big part of our efforts. We are now working, Rebecca and the public health staff and the municipal collaboration staff are working on an application to the Bar Foundation for additional resources related to effective vaccine communication. We are working with our individual communities. I just had a lengthy call with Lynn this morning on the issue of vaccinating seniors in subsidized and public housing. We discussed in just this morning's meeting ways that we can encourage the state to improve the intake system so that it is less confusing for folks that have already been given a priority. Some of them were on the phone starting at midnight last night trying to get a spot, and we're really trying to see if we can rationalize it. As always, our ability to change these systems is sometimes limited, but I do want people to know that we are very, very heavily focused on it. And many of the staff, not only a half a dozen of the directors, but many of the staff are working on this as well, and is taking a big part of our day. I'll close by saying, for those of you who may wonder with all the policy work and all the COVID work, whether we actually get any land use planning done, I would note that I have 4 update meetings this morning with staff on individual projects that are continuing to move forward. We see that through through meetings this week, I believe in Winthrop, adopting a new vision. And we see it also, fortunately, apropos of Sam's report earlier, in the contracts that are continuing to come through to us from individual cities and towns, which is important financially for us, but also most important because it enables us to get our work done. I do think that many of our planning staffs are beginning to get to the point where they can say, okay, we can refocus on the planning stuff again. And that is, we're not all the way there yet. A lot of the planning staff have other responsibilities now that are related to health or COVID response, but we're beginning to see a sort of reconnection with some of the more traditional planning work. And that has certainly been the case in regard to housing choices, because we know of many communities that are intending to use that new tool in Springtown meeting and try and get some things passed that they were not previously able to get passed or wouldn't even honestly consider. And the planning departments are definitely heavily engaged in that, including several people on this phone call, on this Zoom. So let me stop there with ongoing thanks to our staff and all of you for all of this work.
Mark?
I see.
Yes, Robert. Yes, sorry.
I see Bob has a question, and then Sam.
Mark, quick question. Do we have any information about how our 101 cities and towns are doing financially? I know some are doing fine, but others, because of the additional costs and burdens of what we're going through and reduced revenues, how are they going to manage and how they're going to balance this year as we head towards the Springtown meetings?
Well, I think a number of the managers and others on the phone, select persons can certainly speak to this individually. I would say things are not great, but things are hugely better than they are in many other states around the country. Honestly, MAPC's position has been the administration and the legislature should have raised revenue, and we still think they should raise revenue because there have been cuts in other parts of the budget that are very difficult to deal with, and because localities have additional costs. That said, our budget maintained local aid for education and other accounts in 2021. We dipped deeply into our rainy day fund, which I think was appropriate. And recent news from the federal government, especially the reimbursement rates from FEMA, have freed people up. I have seen even just in the past week, have freed people up to do more COVID response work that they were previously a little bit concerned about doing. The FEMA reimbursement rate, the extension of the CARES dollars, the passage of a relief bill, and the prospect of another relief bill, all of these are salutary in terms of local finances. It is going to be a struggle. We're looking for MAPC, and I know our cities and towns are looking for, will there be a greater dip that we need to deal with in 2022? And we're always watching for that. But on the whole, I think things are in reasonably good shape, given that we're suffering from a pandemic and suffering from a recession. Others may want to chime in on that. Perhaps I'm being, even for me, a little bit uncharacteristically optimistic.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sam, did you still have a question, or we can't hear you, Sam?
Can you hear me now?
Now we can.
All right, sorry about that. Mark, I'm wondering if you could just talk for a half a minute about the fact that the mayor of Boston and the Secretary of Transportation will be in Washington, D.C., as far as we know. What impact do you see that? How do you see that playing out for us?
I'll say a few words, and Rebecca may have something to add on this as well. I mean, Massachusetts is doing quite well so far in terms of important position appointments in the Biden administration. I like to say these are all people we have contact with. What I don't like is the fact that I don't think any of my cell phone numbers are going to work from now on. So I'm a little concerned about that. It's always good to have people you can call. I don't think they're going to be necessarily, kind of shilling for the Bay State on every decision. They can't do that anymore, but it gives us contacts. It gives us people who have seen the things that we've gone through. It gives us people that we can be in touch with on critical issues. Some people are a little surprised that Secretary Pollack has moved to Federal Highway Administration, but honestly, having a person with as much sensibility as she has for transit, bike, and ped, as well as safety issues, in the highway position is actually a good thing, because that's where a lot of the money is. That's where most of the money is. So, having Gina McCarthy, who we've worked with so closely in years back in the Romney administration on smart growth issues, having a critical position in regard to climate, along with John Kerry, is incredibly important and helpful. So I think this is a good thing. It does create a little bit of churn, certainly in my city, in Boston. But, and in the administration, we don't know yet, or at least I don't know what's going to happen in terms of Secretary of Transportation over the long term. But this is what happens, and I think it's going to be good for us. It's going to be good for the policy issues that they will address.
I would just add, it's not even just at those levels. We have our friend Melissa Hoffer going over to EPA. Arthur Jemison is going to be at HUD. So it's just, I think, very exciting to think about the work that we should be doing at the federal level. The other thing I would add is we did have a meeting with Representative Catherine Clark, and it was just such a uplifting meeting. It was actually right after the siege at the Capitol. So it kind of was in this scary moment where we hadn't had the kind of time to really think about, what the Democrats taking the Senate would mean in terms of policy. But our congressional delegation is, very powerful and going to be chairing a lot of really important committees. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to take good ideas that kind of started here and bring them and scale them up at the federal level. So I'm excited about what our federal work is going to look like for the next 4 years.
Thank you.
Awesome. Are there any other burning questions before we kind of continue on with the agenda? Great. Thank you so much, Mark. Okay, good. Love the thumbs up. Okay, next up on the agenda, I'm going to call upon the legislative chair, Keith, to give us an update.
Very good. Well, thanks, Erin, and thank you all for being here today. And I just want to start out by echoing Mark Drayson's comments about the extraordinary work of the MAPC staff this past legislative year, and just got a running start on the new year we're already in. Our government affairs team really showed what the value of our organization is, and I think that I describe it as a legacy year for MAPC, that so many of the policy priorities that our organization stands for found expression in meaningful legislation, even at the 11th hour or the 13th hour, and that we should all be very, very proud of the folks on our team that are working towards all of the vision that we have for our region. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lizzie.
Thanks, Keith. I appreciate everyone's kind words and support. It was definitely I was just looking at my calendar, and because it is hard to believe that it was still January when the session actually itself finally ended, because the team and I had such a incredibly exhausting evening watching the legislature make those final decisions about bills that we were following so closely. So I think Mark actually kind of gave a really good overview of what happened with all of those pieces of legislation. And I'm happy to kind of run through the top level again or go into greater detail and see if folks have questions. Just kind of as a quick refresher, the climate bill, I think it was definitely the one that we were most disappointed to see the governor veto that legislation. It kind of came under fire from the chamber and some real estate groups at the very end, and the governor ultimately vetoed it. It was, folks may remember that the administration actually came out with its clean energy and climate plan on New Year's Eve. And a lot of the pieces that were included in the climate bill actually, echoed and supported pieces of the CECP, the Clean Energy and Climate Plan. And we did a tremendous amount of advocacy work to try to stave off that veto that we had heard might be coming. One bit of noteworthy news is that the legislature is actually, even without committees, taking up the climate bill again tomorrow. And so they are moving that legislation again. We actually I had a conversation yesterday with a senator who referred to it as taking up the governor's vetoes, and then he had to sort of correct himself and remind himself that in fact we are in a new session. It's not taking up the governor's vetoes, but is effectively very similar. So they moving the legislation as it passed. The governor and the administration have given some indication of what they are likely to veto when the bill gets back to their desk. And so we are again kind of pushing for advocacy to make sure that we can, override those and sustain the legislation as it moved. I'm happy to move on. I can also take questions as we go. I know Rebecca and Leah also just spent a tremendous amount of time on this legislation. So I also just want to see if they have any other pieces to add there.
I think the one piece I would add, just so folks on this call are aware, is that, one of the major issues of contention has been around the stretch energy code and the opt-in stretch energy code. And that is actually something that MAPC has worked the most on and the hardest on, and, has heard from our communities about. And so it's something that we're really hoping will be in the bill. I think the bill that will be passed tomorrow will be the exact same bill, but, very concerned about a veto or, some sort of amendment. And so we'll be working hard and building, support from our mayors and local officials to make sure that that veto is overridden, so we can get that important stretch energy code into place to help our communities who we've been doing all this net zero planning with.
I'd like to add something there if I can, because as my staff knows, and many of you know, I'm kind of the housing guy. So, I'm the one who occasionally raises concerns about whether or not we're going to make it more expensive to build housing, particularly affordable housing. And I just want people to understand that I am 1,000% behind the language in this legislation regarding the stretch code. Every now and then we need to change building codes. And every time we've done it, going back decades, the development community will say, oh, it's going to cost more money. And the reality is that every now and then you have to address critical safety issues through an adjustment to the building code. And the critical safety issue in our times is climate. I sometimes like to say, as a lifelong Bostonian, we wouldn't have two means of egress if it weren't for the Coconut Grove fire. So thank God we have that. Someone has to fix the building code every now and then. And that's the case here. It's not going to be a tremendous amount of money. It's in some cases not going to be any additional cost at all. And the private sector will adjust. We were leaders on the original stretch code, but what is that now, Rebecca, like 8 years ago, 10 years ago? And most of the communities have adopted it. So we have to go forward and move to the next step. And we've been knocking and knocking and knocking on the door of the BBRS to do that for years without legislation. And we need the legislation to make sure that it happens.
Erin, this is Yolanda. I have a question. So we've been I've been getting advocacy from some of my constituents asking me to email the governor to have him support this next climate. Do we know exactly why I didn't follow it closely enough, why he vetoed the climate bill? What was it, the stretch code stuff? Is that why?
Well, I want to say the stretch code stuff it's hard to quite get your hands around it in that in the Clean Energy and Climate Plan, there's actually, it goes further. It calls for the same timeline in terms of implementing the stretch code. And then it even goes further and says that that should become base code, I think by 2027. But I think, it's been, if you read his veto letter, it is general rhetoric around housing affordability, not necessarily calling out a specific provision. The other major differential is around what the interim target should be in meeting our net zero goal by 2050. The Clean Energy and Climate Plan has called for a 45% reduction in the year 2030, and the climate legislation mandates a 50% reduction. So that's the other major point of disagreement.
I just dropped the letter from the governor into the chat. If folks want to take a look, it's pretty short and lays out some of those concerns.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks, Leah. Sandra?
So, Rebecca and everyone, what do you make of the $6 billion discrepancy that the governor says is, or the cost of the 50% goal versus 45%?
Yeah, I think there will be cost. I think that number is, really kind of pulling at the largest number you could get by trying to add up some of the things in the modeling. I think another important thing to recognize is that the Clean Energy and Climate Plan doesn't take into account any federal actions that we might get from our new partners in the federal government. So I would hate to kind of get hung up on these two interim targets as a reason to, not really advance important climate legislation.
Yeah, I think I'd look at it somewhat politically as well. I mean, it's 2021. Nobody knows what it's going to cost by 2050. Nobody knows. And it's almost a little childish to be having this incredible fight over 45 or 50. I mean, it's not like they're at 30 or 60. So, I hope they can either work it out or in any event, it should not be the reason why we just can't pass climate legislation.
Erin?
Yep, go ahead, Buzz.
My ear fell out. I've been on the phone with the environmental professional advocates about this issue and others. And it's absolutely consistent with what Mark and the others are saying. I'm really intrigued that before there was a huge public effort to get the governor not to veto it. And I've been trying to find out, is there some way we can find out how many calls went into his office? Because at least from the number of people who were reaching me, I think it was a very dramatic amount. And that ought to come back to him at some point. That's a short question. The longer question is, I'm also hearing from all those same people, ELM, MCAN, Sierra Club, all those folks are saying, we really ought to be out there now, support the legislature for doing this so rapidly. We appreciate that, and urge the governor not to screw around with it and just to get it passed. Is that going to be needed? What's the political equation on that?
Yeah, I'm so heartened to see the reaction from the legislature, especially, for the new speaker to really come in and make this a priority. And honestly, it's an unprecedented speed. I was a little bit scared. I've never seen the legislature really work quickly, but they're actually doing it. And so I'm so heartened to see that. And I think that's right, is we really need to commend them for that action. My major concern from our perspective is really, I think the targets are important and we're supportive of them, but we need the policies to help us meet those targets. And to lose the stretch code, that's a huge tool our communities are looking for to help them meet their net zero goals, and then, in turn, the state's goals. So I think there's going to be need to do a lot of work to push back on that. One piece, and maybe we can share this around, is there was an interesting study that just came out from Brown University looking at climate lobbying in Massachusetts and kind of understanding kind of the weight of testimony, which I think is about 90% in support of climate policy moving forward. And then kind of what are the, I would say, kind of moneyed interest, or, folks that are really kind of maybe putting more dollars into lobbying against it. And I mean, I don't think you would be surprised to see that it's really the utilities and the real estate lobby that are kind of maybe not doing that grassroots work of hundreds of calls or letters, but spending lots of dollars lobbying against climate legislation. So it was a really interesting report that Brown University did, and something I think we should share with the executive committee.
We are also, just to follow up on your last comment, Buzz, putting together kind of an action email that will thank the legislature for their work in moving the climate legislation so quickly, and also give people an opportunity to weigh in with the governor again. So we're starting that whole advocacy pitch all over again. And thanks to Leah for moving that ahead. We are also working very closely with all of those climate advocates. We're sitting at all of those tables too. So we're working in close concert with all of those organizations. All right, I'm going to move on. There's a couple more things to cover. So the next one I wanted to talk about was the transportation bill, which is, Mark mentioned, the governor did pass the transportation bond bill. It's a 5-year, $16.5 billion. Kash is nodding. Great, I got it right. $1 billion 5-year bond. Lots of really good programs that were in there that, I'd say obviously transportation was a major priority for us through this session. We were really sad not to see a big transportation revenue bill move its way through the legislative session. But some of the authorizations that are new to this transportation bond definitely kind of bear the imprint of MAPC. So there's new authorizations around bus planning. There's new authorizations around municipal and regional planning. One of the big things that we pushed for was reauthorization of complete streets funding, with a special carve out for lower income communities. And again, the governor's legislation didn't originally have that in there, so we worked to get amendments to change that. That language was included. One of the big provisions that we'd push for around more data transparency around transportation network companies, that's TNCs like Uber and Lyft, that language got in there. Will not surprise any of you to know that our own Tim Reardon worked very closely to make sure that that language was perfect. It was a little less than perfect for Tim's standards, but it's close enough, so we'll take it. So it is a huge victory to make sure that we'll actually have a very clear sense of the impact that companies like Uber and Lyft are actually having on our roads. The things that got vetoed that we were really disappointed to see on vetoes were the Tnc fees. I think everyone was really surprised that the administration vetoed the Tnc fee piece, not least because the governor actually proposed an increase to Tnc fees twice this legislative session, and a version of it was passed in the House and the Senate. So it seemed like everybody was in agreement that we should actually be increasing our Tnc fees. And the rationale around the veto seems to be that we don't actually have a clear sense of what trips are going to look like on Uber and Lyft. But, as Mark mentioned, our transportation team, and especially Allison Felix, did a ton of very quick work to do an estimate of how much money the Tnc fees would raise, even if trips continued at existing pandemic levels. I'm hoping Kasha can just kind of drop into the chat that research that Allison did, because it was really quick and really impressive. We've already had a number of conversations with folks inside the building about refiling the Tnc fee provisions. I think everyone's not entirely sure what the right path is in terms of the fee structure to pursue, but it will definitely be a discussion this session. The two other things that were vetoed that we were really disappointed didn't make it across the finish line were a congestion commission, which would have actually started the conversation around thinking about how we price our roads. And actually in an earlier version, MAPC would have been included on that congestion commission. The version that made it across the finish line through the legislature, we were not. But again, we were surprised and disappointed to see the governor take that language out, because it's really just to start the conversation about how we should be pricing our roads. And then the last piece that the governor vetoed is a provision around a low-income fare pilot program. I think there is a lot of support in the building to move something like this. Again, I think, already I know that the Senate is planning to move that legislation this legislative session, and whether or not it's because of the pandemic or really just making our overall transit fare structure more equitable, I think everyone's in agreement that that's something we'll have to move. And so I expect that they will move it with more time to override a gubernatorial veto. I just want to stop there and see, particularly if Kasha has anything to add. Kasha and our transportation team were really instrumental in kind of helping with all of the pieces that were included in the bond. And see if anyone has any questions. Sorry, forgot that part.
I think you've covered everything, Lizzie.
Love it when that happens. Okay, if there are kind of some quick questions, I want to make sure we maintain kind of our time here and make sure that we get to everything we need to get to. But if anyone has any questions, yes, Jenny.
Yeah, I have a question about MAPC's role in potentially the promulgation of the regulations for the MBTA communities and also for housing choice. Do you think that there will be a role, or for any other agencies potentially?
That's the one bill I actually haven't talked about in depth is the economic.
You're going to get there. Okay.
Nope, that's
got it. Pause.
Okay. But I'll just let you know, it's funny actually, because it's coming up. People actually have been really struggling with whether or not that MBTA provision is inside which bond it's in. So you're not the first person to ask that question related to transportation. We've already had a number of internal conversations about this. I expect we will be, weighing in very heavily. They don't typically move very quickly, but for the fact that the legislation did go into effect immediately. So we do know that there's going to need to be more guidance for cities and towns. Mark, do you want to add something there?
Yes, but very briefly, we are in conversations with DHCD about it. I've had one conversation already myself. I think that on the MBTA side, there are two separate issues, Jenny. I think one is sort of what are the long-term parameters for the program? And the other is how long do you have to comply, which they may have to address more quickly because the legislation is not specific about it, and it prohibits cities and towns that don't comply from applying for a series of state grants. So my guess is DHCD may address that issue more quickly. I don't think anybody is suggesting that communities need to come into compliance instantly. I think that there will be a period of time to come into compliance. Tim and his staff also did an analysis of our communities. It showed 98 of our communities are in the T district. 64 actually have land that would be affected by that requirement within a half mile of a transit station. And of that 64, I think 26 are already in compliance and the remaining 38 are not. We plan to send that information to those 64 communities so they can confirm that we are right or give us some new information that might adjust that. But I was surprised at how many communities are already in compliance, honestly.
So again, the last piece is around the economic development bond bill. And again, that was our big victory around housing choices, and this piece around the MBTA area. I think, you know, the places where we were disappointed to see vetoes there, it is just worth noting, is around specifically around the tenant protections that the governor vetoed. So the governor vetoed language around right of first refusal and eviction ceiling. The eviction ceiling language was kind of already a more watered down version of what we'd hoped to see. Again, this is a place where I've already had conversations with folks in the building. I think there's a lot of support behind moving these tenant protections and in fact broadening them, particularly in response to the pandemic, and kind of making sure that those are an important part of recovery. You know, we are very short on time, so I just wanted to flag one last thing for folks, which is that the governor is dropping the FY22 budget in 5 minutes. So some of my team might actually hop off to watch that press conference. So I just want to let folks know, and obviously we'll start our whole round of summaries about what's included and what's not. You know, keep your fingers crossed for DLTA and Shannon. And off we go to a new budget cycle. I think that's it.
Mark, did you want to say one more thing?
Believe it or not, I don't.
Oh, okay. You went off mute, so I was just bracing myself. Does anyone have any quick questions? Or obviously this is an ongoing conversation. My fingers are very much crossed for what is announced in 4 minutes. And we'll just kind of go from there. Oh yes, Tom.
I just want to say thank you to the whole MAPC team. It's really tremendous. I know the afternoon of January 5th, we were like, yeah, nothing's going to happen. It's all going to die. And then getting up in the morning, it's like, oh my gosh, they actually got it done. So I just really want to thank everybody for all of your work, you know, over the many, many weeks and months, and, you know, particularly up over the finish line. It really has a huge impact. And now we're trying to figure out what it all means, or at least what some of it means. So thank you.
And thanks, Tom, for that comment. I think we all kind of share that sentiment, and I'm really appreciative, obviously, of the legislative team, and really all. I know that you know, legislation particularly does not occur in a bubble, so I know there's a lot of cross conversations, and I know, you know, Mark, Rebecca, Lizzie kind of mentioned other departments kind of in divisions working consistently, and I know there are so many more that are also working really hard to make sure that we make some progress in areas that need to make progress. So thank you as well for that. And I look forward to hearing hopefully some positive news in 3 minutes. So fingers crossed. Okay, great. So next up on the agenda is the review and approval of the comprehensive economic development strategy. And I am going to call upon Betsy Cowan Neptune to start us off.
Great. And Erin, I do want to be sensitive to time. So can you just give me, I was planning a 10-minute presentation with 10 minutes of discussion, but I want to just make sure that we're okay on time there. And I can do speed talking if we need to.
That's fine.
Okay, great.
Maybe a little more of the latter, but that's okay. We'll. Okay. It was sent out to the group ahead of time, so.
Great.
But I know you do, your team has done a ton of work on it, and I don't want to disrespect all the good information we're going to hear.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to give a brief presentation on the SEDS. Again, you all received it on Monday, and I'm happy to answer questions offline as well. Before we begin, I do want to just recognize the members of my team who are on the call, Josh Eichen and Raul Gonzalez, who are senior planners, and Jen Kaplan, who is a planner too. And there was tremendous work from a number of other staff. So I do just want to recognize them, and they're here today. So thank you. So first, just a note in terms of who we are as the economic development team. So we have a goal to expand employment, entrepreneurship, and real estate development opportunities. And we focus on a variety of different clients and constituents as we do this work. So obviously municipalities, regional organizations, state entities, and we do a number of different types of assistance. An additional point is that we partner with the Economic Development Administration. So this is both helping communities access EDA funding, but also doing planning in the region, which I'll talk about in a second. So what is this document that you're looking at? So this is a 5-year strategy, and technically it's a prerequisite for our designation as an EDD, the Economic Development District. So the EDA requires that we do this every 5 years. We update it every year. But more importantly for us, this is a guide to help us really think about economic development in the region. This guides the work of the economic development team and also our agency. But I would say we were actually incredibly fortunate to update this last year because this really helped us then create a regional recovery strategy. And I'll talk about all the details of that in a second. So I'll briefly touch on the process. So first we formed an advisory committee, and I believe it was February when I was with you all talking briefly about the members of the advisory committee. So this was representatives of business organizations, entrepreneurs, small business providers, municipal staff, members of academia, and also funders and lenders. And so they formed a great advisory committee to help us really get a breadth of perspectives. We began the process in December 2019. January, we started background existing conditions. We did a analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then based on that, we created a vision statement with the advisory committee. Then, as you'll see in a second, COVID happened, and that certainly altered our thinking about the plan itself, the literature review that we engaged in, and then certainly the development of the goals and strategies. We developed the goals and the strategies in partnership with a number of staff internally, in partnership with the MetroCommon team, and also with our advisory committee. So I do want to highlight, in reference to MetroCommon, there are several framing elements, and this sits under the MetroCommon planning process. So we know MetroCommon obviously is through 2050. This is a 5-year plan, but this sits under those overarching goals and strategies of MetroCommon, and it's our effort to make progress on those goals within a 5-year timeframe. So you'll see a lot of synergy between the goals and strategies in this plan and the overall MetroCommon planning process. Also in January, we highlighted 3 major themes that would form the basis of this plan, and you'll see that reflected through our goals. One is around racial equity, the second is economic resilience, and the third is climate resilience. And I'll talk about this as we go through the presentation, but I did just want to make a quick note on racial equity. Certainly that became a bigger issue last year, but has long been a focus of our agency. Thinking about the makeup of the region in terms of residents and also business owners, we know obviously the region continues to be predominantly white, but we did particularly want to address the racial wealth gap, which we know has been a major issue and continues to increase. And then also thinking about if we address the racial wealth gap, what opportunities does that bring for the region, both in terms of employment, business development, and then the overall strategies that are addressing the racial wealth gap actually benefit the broader population as well. So that's why we chose to focus on that particular element. So based on those frames and our SWOT analysis, we then created a vision statement focused first on equity, and again, thinking about generational transfer of wealth and wealth creation. And this again, focusing on people of all backgrounds, but with a particular focus on the BIPOC population, which is a term that emerged last year, which is thinking about the Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the region. The second is around resilience, and this was thinking about not just economic resilience in terms of the ability of the region to withstand shocks, but also public health, which became a major issue last year, and then climate resilience as well. And then finally, our team has done some research on big challenges for our region in terms of the location of employment centers, where people can afford to live, and then the transit options that connect those two. And so really envisioning a region that's more interconnected, where homes and employment centers have more connectivity, or they're closer together, and so that people can live and work more easily. So there are 2 major issues that again affected the development of our plan last year. So the first is around COVID, which started obviously in March and really then shaped our thinking for this plan as an economic recovery strategy for the region. So again, integrating public health in a way that we hadn't done before, really thinking about access to key lifelines to help people engage in productive activity in the region, thinking about economic diversification. And so this is not only thinking about the types of industries. We know some industries are really growing in the region, were able to withstand COVID, others were severely impacted, but also, as I just mentioned, the geographic concentration. So how do we spread out the diversity of industries across the region? One of the big issues that our team focused on last year was rethinking downtowns and commercial and office space. So you'll see those strategies reflected in this plan as well. And then overall, how do we create the conditions for small and large businesses to thrive in this new environment? So both digital access, but then also seeing that housing choice was part of the economic development bond bill. We see housing and economic development intimately connected. And then racial justice. Again, certainly our organization has been focused on this for years, but this became a bigger issue last year. And so it allowed us to take a deeper look into different strategies around wealth creation, certainly thinking about stable housing. And this is both what Lizzie was just talking about in terms of tenant protections and rental options, but then also home ownership. So affordable home ownership and also traditional home ownership. One key element of this plan that I did want to highlight is the role that the private sector plays in all of this. And we were really fortunate to have a number of members of business organizations on the advisory committee. And the private sector plays a key role in workforce development, supplier diversity, and a number of other things, even housing production. So you'll see a number of strategies are focused specifically on the private sector. And then finally, we thought a lot about community-driven economic systems. So this is both all of the mutual aid societies or the ways that people supported each other through alternative banking and resource sharing, but then also how do we strengthen our economy so that it can be stronger internally? What's the means of production and supply chains within the region that are stronger so we are less reliant on the outside? So our team conducted a literature review and we kind of focused on these 4 major themes, again, using those 3 lenses of racial equity and economic and climate resilience. And we focused on wages, benefits, working conditions. We focused on the labor force diversification. This was thinking especially about high-skilled and low-skilled workers. We then dug into home ownership and business ownership as tools for wealth creation. And certainly last year, I think, put that into question about the ability of those two to create wealth. And that's why we have a number of strategies also focused on the transfer of wealth. And then finally, housing and employment centers and transit access, as I mentioned. So once we did that review, we then distilled it down to 3 major themes. So this is around financial stability that I'll go into in a second, wealth creation, and then creating the conditions for businesses to be successful. So that's around housing, digital access, which became a major issue last year, and transit. So here are the 3 goals for the plan. And as I talk about these, I do want to make a quick note that you'll notice that these goals are really focused on individuals first. And one of the comments was, if this is an economic development plan, why isn't there more of a focus on businesses? And we argue as a team that actually if you focus on individuals and providing the conditions for individuals to be successful economically, you're also solving for the broader business conditions. One of the business leaders that we've talked to mentioned, he said, it's not for us an issue of workforce training, it's an issue of getting housing, transportation, and also improving the quality of life in the region so that individuals will want to work here. So thinking about the overall conditions to help individuals be successful will advance the economic development of the region. So we focus first on financial stability, and this is thinking about 3 to 6 months of financial savings so that folks can weather hardship. The second is around increased parity between the wealth of the BIPOC population and the white population in the region. And then finally, the third is this connection between where employment centers are located, where homes are located, and what is affordable to individuals working in those employment centers, and then what are the transit options.
Agency in government is using every tool at their disposal to drive resources to those communities. And it fulfills long-standing commitments to leverage our vast natural resources.
Thank you, Erin. Should I keep going?
Yep, keep going. I was going to say, can everyone just mute? Thanks.
Great. So we have 3 major goals again, and I won't go into these in detail. They're in the document, but around financial stability. So that involves workforce development, and again, note the important role that the private sector plays here. The second is around predatory lending and access to financial institutions. And then the third is the publicly funded income enhancements, particularly for those earning less than a living wage, and support for reduction in household expenses. The second goal is around wealth creation, and this is everything that you'll see in here. There's multiple strategies we went into depth here, but first just around stable housing, and this again is thinking about rental housing and affordable homeownership and traditional homeownership, building the resiliency and stability of businesses that are owned by the BIPOC population. So you'll see here all of the recommendations around the downtown redevelopment, all that we'll have to be thinking about in terms of vacancies. And these strategies, certainly there's strategies that are focused on BIPOC owners, but also broader strategies focused on the background of any owner, and certainly thinking about the strength and vitality of small businesses across the region. The third is around the community-driven economic systems, as I mentioned. And then the fourth is exploring tax reform to address systemic inequity. One of the things that we researched in the literature review and then discussed with the advisory committee. And finally, our last goal, this again is thinking about where employment centers are located, where the housing is, and the transportation options. So this is thinking about the production of affordable housing or employment centers and transit nodes, as we were just discussing. Expanding digital access. This was a big issue, and our team is working on this right now. So this is thinking both about digital access for work, but then also learning. And then finally, access to affordable, safe, and accessible transportation options. So in terms of implementation, our team has been engaged in response and recovery work since March of last year. And so we're already implementing a number of the elements of the plan in our strategies for recovery. This is both municipal level and regional level planning, capacity building with our economic development practitioners in the region. The next element is really working with the government affairs team on the legislative agenda. So you'll notice there's a number of legislative pieces here. So we'll be working closely with the legislative committee on the items that we might want to bring forward this cycle. And then finally, research. So a lot of these items are actually emerging right now. So it's looking at best practices around the country, best practices for recovery and response efforts historically, and then tracking the progress of this plan as we implement it. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll actually stop sharing my screen so that I can see you all. But I did want to open it up for any questions either on our process or on the strategies and the goals. And I know that was a lot to digest. The document has been sent. I'll just make a note that we submit this to the Economic Development Administration pending approval of this body. And then that will guide our work for the next 5 years, and we'll update it every year. And we'll work in partnership with our internal partners and external partners to implement it.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Oh, a little bit of feedback. Thank you so much, Betsy. And I'll call on people if that's okay for you. I see Buzz's hand up. Buzz?
So first of all, I would congratulate you for a remarkably good report. On a couple of counts, I've been involved in many of these SEDS reports, and this is the first one which was really integrated to the rest of our regional planning and our regional plans. So it's really exceptional for that in that count. It is clear, I worry a little bit about the SEDS because the Department of Commerce is not generally worried as much about diversity or climate or things like that. And we used to get a lot of money from them. We now get less money, but this is really a great opportunity to think about our economic development. My one sort of question, maybe it's a criticism, is in the vision, the very beginning vision. I know, first of all, the SWOTs are exceptionally good too. I really liked what you did with the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities. I encourage everybody to go look at it. In the vision, I'm a huge climate fan, climate action fan, and I'm a huge fan of the idea that climate action in Massachusetts is an economic development. It's not a need, it isn't a restraint, it is actually a catalyst for economic development. And you say crisis, you talk about the climate in several places, but you don't talk about the fact that the climate industry could be about as big as our pharmaceutical industry in the next 5 or 6 years. And I wonder if there was a reason for that or an opportunity to fix it.
Yeah, no, thank you for that note. And we were just talking about this with our team this morning. We didn't dive into the climate piece as much as we could have. And so we have the opportunity to do an update every year, and we'll be delving into that more deeply because certainly, as you saw from the climate bill, there's an incredible opportunity. So we do focus on how do we support new businesses and really thinking about economic diversification, but we didn't dig into that as much as we want to. So that's one. And then the second is thinking about kind of all of the elements to creating a more healthy ecosystem. So local businesses and local production, and how do we think about the ways that we can have a healthier climate that would then kind of advance economic development in the region. So I thank you for that point. So we'll be doing an update to the document based on our economic recovery planning right now, and we'll incorporate that. Great, thank you, Buzz.
Thank you, and I see Tom.
Yeah, thanks so much, Betsy. Just a couple comments. One, I think this is fantastic. I love the integration and the focus on the individuals. And that holistic approach and thinking about wealth and wealth creation. And it's something that we're talking more about, among the planning staff here. And it's just something that I see this as just an important way of framing so much of the work that we're doing in communities, and expanding sort of that concept and framing it that way. I think a couple of conversations I had with people that are like initially saying, well, why are you talking about wealth? And all the connections that come together. So I just applaud you for advancing that. Just a real small question, process-wise, after today, what comes next?
So after today, pending approval, we would submit it to the Economic Development Administration. And then we'll have kind of working groups to implement sections of it. So one really focused on the regional recovery piece. The second is our team has done some really thoughtful work on kind of who are our research partners in this space. So both our data services team, but then who are the other people that are thinking about this? And then the third piece is the legislative agenda. So working with Lizzie and her team. But I'll just say this really is going to be the roadmap for us as a team advancing our work. So the economic development team and the broader kind of teams at the agency. The second thing I'll say too is that this document then guides applicants for EDA funding. So Raul's here, and thank you so much, Raul, for your work leading our EDA work. So he will be speaking with municipalities about projects, and one of the big questions that the EDA has is how does this align with the SEDS in the region? So both in terms of responding to people who are interested, but then also we really want to target particular, say, community colleges, and how can we help them really boost their facilities as they think about workforce development. So we're going to be more targeted in terms of our approach with that.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks, Tom.
Great. And Steve?
This Steve, there's a bunch of us.
Steve Silvera?
Thank you. I don't like to just be, I don't want to jump on Steve Olenoff's toes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
we have multiples. Yes,
That's
Steve
okay.
Silvera.
Yes, thank you. So a couple of things. First, I do want to congratulate Betsy and her team on putting this document together. I know a lot of work goes into this, and I think in most respects, it's a solid piece of work. I do have a couple of strong objections that are actually going to require me to vote no on this. The first is on page 3, the whole section on Indigenous recognition. I don't think that actually has any place in a 21st century economic development document. I think that's a hugely complicated issue. And from my own perspective, there's literally not one sentence in that whole little blue box that I agree with. But more important to me, not agreeing with specifically what is stated there, I actually don't even think it belongs in the document. The second thing is, I think, my opinion, several of the recommendations in the later goals, I think are more aspirational and appropriate for non-governmental political organizations than they are for a governmental planning organization. And so I think they actually they weaken the document and diminish our stature. So I just wanted to be clear that I've read it. I appreciate all the hard work that Betsy's done, but that is my perspective on the document.
Great, thank you, Steve. And I'll say you probably read the document more closely than most anyone, and I thank you so much for, Steve was gracious enough to catch a couple typos and edits that we need to make. So Steve, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate speaking with you last week about this. One, I'll say just, the note that we had was really thinking about the historical implications of our work and the land that we sit on, and all the kind of, that planning is really steeped in a broader history. But I appreciate your comment on that. And the second one is, I think it's a fair point, and we talked a lot about this, are we swinging for the fences on some of our broader policy recommendations? And I'll just say, and this was a question I think it was asked by someone else that I spoke to, what's the value of this document beyond MAPC? And this really is a signal to our partners to say, here's where we want you to partner with us. And here are the things that we're really hoping that you'll do. So certainly on the private sector side, we had a number of business organizations on our committee and are following up with them to say, what's your legislative agenda now, especially around these issues that we agree on, so that we can advance them together. But I appreciate your comments. Mark, I don't know if you want to say anything further, because I know you.
One of the great things about this executive committee is we can have differences of opinion. I think that, there was a very thorough process, as I think Steve recognizes, to generate the document. I'm comfortable with the policy recommendations. I do think we will. I'm also comfortable with the appearance of the language regarding Indigenous populations, although I think there are one or two ways in which we might improve that language. And Betsy and I are committed to taking a look at that. I think that, you know, we are at a point in time, we're at a point in time politically, but it affects us in terms of our policies, where I think we need to dig deeper on some of the equity issues than we have in the past. And I think that requires us in our planning documents to set a marker very high and very specific and very precise. And then it also requires us in our follow-up to say, what can we accomplish in 5 years? What can we accomplish in 2 years? What can we accomplish in 6 months? And, you know, I want to do both of those things. And I think we're doing one here, but I'm pledging to do the other as well. We understand that some of the mile markers we've set down are rather distant, but we get there one step at a time. And I think we're ready to try and start taking those steps at this point in time.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for those comments. And I appreciate the dialogue a lot. We are a bit tight on time, and I want to, you know, be conscious of that. But if there's any other comments or questions, I would take them at this time, or I would definitely welcome a motion at this time as well. If
move adoption.
Okay, thank you. I did not get that second. Who was that second?
It was me. Second.
Okay, Jenny, I'm sorry. So the motion was made by Tom, Daniel, and a second was made by Jenny to adopt the SEDS. And I am going to, if there's no other pressing items. Oh, Karen, I'm sorry. Sorry.
I just had one question and I may have missed it. In the document, do you list who was part of the advisory committee? I did not see that.
Excellent question. So we have agreed with the advisory committee, once it's approved and finalized, that we'll list them. Some folks have said we'll just stay in the background and be listed as, you know, thank you so much for participating. But other people have said that they want to be specifically listed as advisory committee members. Okay. So I can send that full list. But they wanted to see.
Yeah, I think it's important to include because
yes,
that's, you know, the staff is amazing. The amazing work you guys done. Obviously that's there, but that it was informed by outside of the bubble is a good thing to let people know. Exactly. And I assume that the advisory committee approved the version that we're about to vote on, right?
We did not actually bring it to a vote for them. They were kind of advisors. And so they provided, you know, technical expertise and content feedback. There was a range of opinions on the advisory committee because it represented all the, you know, the business community all the way to small business providers. So we did not ask for a specific vote, but asked for their feedback on the content.
Okay. Thanks, Aaron. Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Sorry about that, Karen. You're actually my middle, like my perfectly middle square. So the fact that I was just opening my attendance list to do the roll call vote, which is required for this meeting. So if there's no other pressing questions or comments, the vote is before us to approve the SEDS. So everyone unmute if you could, so we can kind of expedite this. So Sharonda?
Aye.
Okay. John is not here. Keith?
Aye.
Karen?
Aye.
Adam?
Aye.
Bob has left. Mayor is not here. Tom? Daniel?
Aye.
John DePriest?
Aye.
Yolanda has left. Sandra?
Aye.
Mo?
Aye.
Jared's not here. Tabor?
Aye.
Steve Olenoff?
Aye.
Caitlin is not here. George?
Aye.
Courtney, and I think she may have had to leave. Jenny?
Aye.
Vandana?
Aye.
Sam?
Aye.
Steve Silvera?
No.
Lauren?
Abstain.
Okay. Mayor Spicer's not here. Juan's not here. Erin? Yes. So the motion passes. All those people, one negative and one abstain. Did you get that, Heidi? Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Betsy, your team. I just want to kind of echo Buzz's comments from earlier as well. What an evolution of previous SEDS. And I think I'm sure you're very proud of the document, but I'm very proud of the document as well.
Great, thank you. And thank you to my team. So thank you all.
Great. And I hopefully, thank you so much. So hopefully you all were able to see Mark's chat. Just so hopefully we can bang this out in 5 extra minutes, but it might have to take 10. Because the next item on the agenda is the annual project inventory. And my understanding is Ben is going to do that. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Erin. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. I'm just going to share my screen. Just let me know that. Does that work?
Yep.
All right. Great. Thanks, everybody. Yes, I am Ben Faust. I manage learning and evaluation at MAPC. One of the projects under my purview is the project inventory. For every project we ask that staff do, we ask that staff mark to checking. I also ask Sasha to check or Erin, if you mind in the chat. We'll keep questions to the end and see if we have any time to answer them. So for every project, we ask staff to identify some of the major indicators of the project, who they're doing it, what they're doing it on, and how long it takes. And what we do then at the end of the year, I take that information and I analyze it. And I try to pull out interesting tidbits, interesting outcomes that might affect the way we do our work. We don't think of this as who's doing what well necessarily. We think of it as lines of inquiry. What is interesting that we can follow up at the department or organizational level to hopefully improve some of the work that we're doing. And so for you all, I pulled out 4 or 5 of the things I think were most interesting, and things that we just want to track. We have a responsibility to do work a certain way and want to make sure we're doing it. So the first thing that I wanted to show you all is our strategic priorities. As many of you know, during our last strategic planning process, we identified 4 strategic priorities that we want to be advancing through our project work. And those are equity, regional collaboration, climate change, and smart growth. I'll just note that this is a pretty tight band of from about 15% to 55%. So the jumps aren't necessarily that significant from year to year. One thing we did see last year that is a continued advancement is around regional collaboration. Just the way we do our work, how we're funded, how we're designed, it really promotes more of a one-to-one type MAPC to municipality type relationship. So it's great to see that departments and teams are working to find ways to work collaboratively with many municipalities as opposed to just one. Another thing we saw last year that we wanted to just keep an eye on is our equity, the percentage of projects that highlight equity as being advanced dropped. That ticked back up to 50%, which is great. And for a lot of these things, it's up to the definition of how project managers are thinking about it, which we've tried to tighten up over the last 2 years. But it's just to indicate that, you know, a project can have equitable outcomes. It can be a project designed to achieve equity, but also any project within a project can have processes that are equitable. You know, is the engagement equitable? Are we recruiting the right people? And so we want to dig into that a little bit over the next year, working with the equity team to figure out how to make sure that we're advancing equity at all levels of our projects, not just at one or the other. So it's a lot of information. Along the bottom are our Metro Common 2050 goals. We transitioned from our Metro Future goals to our Metro Common goals. And I even retroactively went back and assigned projects Metro Common goals. And so, you know, the Metro Common is not our agency work plan, but it does, but we do want to be in any way possible advancing the goals where we can advance them. One of the things that jumped out, and it looks very, very well representative of the size of the department who are kind of prone to advancing them. And so that didn't really stand out in any way necessarily. What was interesting is dynamic and representative government jumped a bunch. And you know, the kind of what we're thinking around that, why that might be happening is COVID response. A lot of the projects around COVID definitely involve local government and also Metro Common. Metro Common's putting a big emphasis on dynamic and representative government. And so we'll be interested to see if that sustains once in the next couple of years. And then one thing just to call out again, this isn't the agency work plan, but economic security is one of the lowest ones registered. Economic security in this sense is really around individual wealth creation, not something we specifically work on. And so it'll be interesting to see if we can come up with some strategies to better incorporate that into our work. And I know Betsy and her team are thinking about that around workforce development. So we'll keep an eye on that. One of the things that I'm interested in, and this speaks to the regional collaboration side, is again, we do a lot of our work with a single municipality, so on a one-to-one basis. And we had noticed that as a share of our projects, how often we work with multiple municipalities, meaning we work with multiple municipalities who are working together on something, wasn't that high. And so we called that out last year and asked departments to think of ways that they can do their work more collaboratively with multiple municipalities, not taking any credit for that, but it was great to see that from that it jumped to almost 50% of our work. Again, whether that has something to do with COVID response and MetroCommon being collaborative by nature, we'll see if that we can sustain that trend.
Ben, if I could just note, could you go back to that page?
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. Now that you went back to the page, I see that the blue and the orange are defined. So thank you. Yeah. No question.
Sorry. Thanks for flagging that. So this is a little bit behind the scenes stuff. So one thing I set up for staff with this data was the ability for departments to go in and look at it from their own department perspective, because looking at it from the organizational perspective only allows for so much information. And so one of the things I set up was, one of the things we're really intent on and why we do the project inventory is to track how frequently we're working with municipalities. So what they can do here is go in and select the year, a span of years, their department, and see who they've worked with when. And if you look over to the right, that box shows which municipalities we haven't worked with over that time span. Last year, we used this information. We had about 14 municipalities we hadn't worked with in the last 4 or 5 years. And we, within the first 6 months, had worked with about 75% of them. And so we'll use the information from that comes out of this chart to promote projects in those places over the as we start developing recruiting for TAP programs and future projects. So we'll be checking up on that next year. And then a much easier way to look at that, we have this chart. The lighter the squares, the less frequently we work with them. The darker the squares, the more frequently we work with them. Again, this is just a way for us to think about where we're doing our work and how frequently we're doing it. And we just noticed, some of some kind of the northwestern parts of the region, we haven't worked with that recently. Again, this is just one-to-one MAPC to the municipality. And I apologize that not all the municipalities are represented. This is actually a web map, which I'll be able to share with you all. So if you zoom in, those municipalities will come up. And finally,
I would also note, if I could, Ben, that historically, we've particularly had a limited number of direct projects with the South Shore. And Betsy and others have made a tremendous effort to try and turn that around. And I think the map indicates that it does. We still have some areas we're struggling with, but the South Shore is better served by us than they were in the historic past.
Yeah, and just recently, a great point, Mark. I was going to mention that last year we flagged that the South Shore we hadn't been working with them as frequently, and so it looks like we've worked to turn that around. And also just to indicate around the coast, I know our environment team has done a great job focusing on some coastal resiliency work, and I think that shows up as well, kind of outside of that inner core, up and down the coast. So that's great. Just last thing, we added a layer to indicate. I'm not going to get too in the weeds on this metric, but we call them environmental justice census tract municipality. So basically, it says this municipality is more diverse and has a lower income population than the rest of the region. It's largely the inner core, and we largely do a lot of our work in the inner core. And so it's great that we're doing work with those municipalities. There are a couple that will point out. Randolph actually was gray last year. We've done a couple projects with them since, which was great. And so again, just another way to look at who we're doing what with and how often, and maybe target some work with the municipalities who have fewer resources than some of the ones outside who are well off and maybe less diverse. And that's it for me this time, and I appreciate your time, and thank you, Erin, for helping.
Thanks so much, Ben. I know this is a ton of work, and it takes a lot of time to not only digest the data, but to translate it so it looks really approachable and easy for the rest of us who just get to enjoy the data. So thank you so much for that. If there are any pressing questions, can you throw your hand up at this time? Great. So thank you so much, Ben, again. Okay, thumbs up, great. So next up is the update on the Winter Council meeting. I don't know if that should be Mark or Heidi. Who wants to?
It will be taking place on, I believe, March the 3rd. Heidi is trying to nail down the hotel now, and of course not. We will be doing it on Zoom, and I'm sure we'll be doing the same in May. Maybe we'll be able to have a real meeting in the fall. I don't know, but we'll continue to hope for that.
Mark, do you have a time of day for the meeting?
Yes, Heidi. Traditional morning, I believe, but what is it exactly?
You are muted, Heidi. It's okay. We're only 10 months into the pandemic. No big deal, Heidi. Go ahead.
Well, I'm typing up notes and looking at the screen. So it will be a morning meeting, but we'll probably start a little bit later than we normally do. Simply and we'll probably end well before noon. We're really trying to make sure that events take into account those working parents who have to get kids up and occupied. And then if they have kids at home that need to have lunch. So
we'll send out the precise time. I think if you bet on 9:30 to 11, you'd probably be in pretty good shape.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
And we are still working on topics, awards, speaker. I'm confident there's going to be a considerable focus on Metro Common because we will be entering the final stages of the Metro Common process at that point in time.
Great. Any questions on that? Perfect. And then the next item on the agenda is the date of the next executive committee meeting, which will be February 17th. Same time, same-ish channel, wherever you like to have it. And just one more thing, any other business not known at the time of the posting? Mark or Heidi? And I really do appreciate everyone kind of staying a little over. I know our schedules are all crazy, and I know it's really hard for us all to make time and continue to make time. So I really appreciate that. So if there's no other business before us, I would love a motion.
Make a motion.
So we're going to say, Tom Daniel, you made that motion to adjourn. Is that the motion you're making, Tom?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. And I'm going to have Karen be the second on that. You all kind of opened your mouth in this one section at a time, so I appreciate that. Yeah. So Karen did the second. So I'm going to, if everyone would unmute, I'm going to do roll call vote. I know a lot of people had to leave, but that's okay. So I'm going to say it really quick. Here we go. Sharonda?
Aye.
John? Not here. Keith? Not here. Karen?
Yep.
Adam? Bob? Not here. Mayor? Tom?
Aye.
John DePriest?
Aye.
Yolanda left. Sandra?
Aye.
Mo?
Aye.
Jared's not here. Tabor?
Aye.
Steve Olenoff?
Aye.
Caitlin's not here. George is not here. Jenny Vandana?
Aye.
Sam?
Aye.
Steve? Lauren? Mayor Spicer? And Aaron? Me? Aye. So the motion passes. Our meeting is now adjourned at 1:09. Thank you again all for coming, and I will see you all on Wednesday, February 17th. Have a great day and be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.